Hi, everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm the Senior Political Organizer at ANHD. And today, myself and my colleague, Abdul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abdul Razak Zachariah, and I'm a graduate intern at ANHD.
So today, the two of us are going to be taking you through really the basic nuts and bolts training about the new Equitable Development Data Explorer and Displacement Risk Index, which were both implemented this year after the passage of Local Law 78. So today we're going to be starting with our this training is going to be broken up into modules. So there'll be shorter pieces of information, about 15 to 30 minutes per module. Each one will be listed by its title, and there'll be a brief sort of outline of the content that's included available where these videos are posted. I'm going to start us off with talking about the background and sort of the history of the tool and how we got here. So module one, our first module, is the introduction and background. How did we get here? What's the point of this tool? Why did folks think that it was important to even have it? So the Equitable Development Data Explorer and the Displacement Risk Index are a result of the passage of Local Law 78, which was passed in 2021. So this law was the result of about 3 years of organizing and advocacy of a coalition known as the Racial Impact Study Coalition. This is a coalition that was made up of neighborhood groups, community-based organizations, planning groups, advocacy groups, and legal advocacy groups who all came together because they recognized that the voices of communities were not being heard in our city's land use process. And also communities struggled to find ways to advocate for themselves, especially when it came to the issue of race and how different policy decisions were affecting their communities, oftentimes along racial lines, which is not anything new in New York City or in American history, but it had really been coming to a head over the Bloomberg and de Blasio administrations with a lot of the land use and policy changes that were made. So what was the problem, right? What did this coalition come together to work on? Largely, evidence that communities had about what was happening in their community, about who was being pushed out, about how their neighborhoods were changing, about communities of color being impacted by policy changes and decision-making, was largely considered anecdotal. When they brought that information to the city sort of said, well, that's your experience. And communities really knew that it wasn't just their experience, that it wasn't just one of their neighbors that they were seeing impacted. It was dozens or hundreds. And as they spoke to people all throughout their community, this was a shared experience. But it wasn't really taken seriously because there were no official channels or official sort of data tools to capture or reflect this. Information about potential changes or displacement or information about the ways communities would be impacted came really late in the land use process in New York City. And so by the time communities sort of got information about the potential displacement risks, it was almost too late to do anything. And so communities over and over again found themselves fighting sort of an uphill battle. They found themselves fighting in ways that they couldn't win. There just wasn't enough time. There wasn't enough information. And most communities don't have the resources or technical expertise that the city does, city agencies, or even wealthy developers have. Another challenge was that the only way that communities could sort of fight for or hope that their needs would be met in terms of investment, in terms of changes or improvements to their schools, their parks, their roads, increases in affordable housing, was essentially only if they agreed to a rezoning or an increase in density, increase in the number of apartments that were built in their community, which were oftentimes mostly, almost all, market rate or luxury apartments that were out of reach for the folks that needed them the most. Also, another sort of, not a challenge, but something that the coalition really fought for and was important to the coalition and is important to housing groups all over the country is fair housing. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, the city is required to what's called affirmatively further fair housing, which means provide opportunities and access to housing equitably to folks across the board. And what we had been seeing in New York was that access was being provided to new housing at a much higher rate to affluent white community members at the expense of low-income residents of color. So a number of these organizations, about 15 organizations, came together and decided to fight for something to change. A big piece that I think I already said, a large part of the issue is that communities got information too late or not at all. And so when communities came and said, we're experiencing this in our neighborhood, and the city said, well, that's just your experience, we realized as a coalition, of which ANHD is a member, we realized that we needed to have the data. They would tell us there's no data on this. They didn't collect it. They didn't analyze it. And so as a coalition and as community groups, we said, okay, well, let's get that data and let's have it to be able to advocate for our needs and respond to what's happening. So after a lot of hard work, negotiations, organizing, advocacy, strategy, and even down to the coalition really taking the lead on drafting and negotiating Local Law 78, it passed. And it has three parts. The first is the Equitable Development Data Explorer. The second is the Displacement Risk Index. And the third are what are called racial equity reports. We will be discussing all of these in this training series and really going through all of them. We're going to focus first in our first 5 or 6 modules on using the Equitable Development Data Explorer and the Displacement Risk Index, because these are both tools that are available all the time. Anyone can use these tools at any time to learn about their neighborhood. We'll be speaking a little bit later about the racial equity reports, because those are produced at the time of a request for a land use change. So those don't necessarily apply to everyone unless there's a proposal for a change. But the first two, the Equitable Development Data Explorer and the Displacement Risk Index, are for anyone and everyone to access at any time. So starting off with the Equitable Development Data Explorer, Abdul's going to take us through this tool in depth. But right now, since this is our introductory module, I'm just going to share a little bit about it. And in the later modules, we'll dive into it more deeply. So this is just a screenshot of one community district that's highlighted. And this, the Equitable Development Data Explorer, is both a map and a data tool. So it has maps and data tables. This is the map view that's shown. It looks at the demographic conditions, the economic conditions, the housing conditions, and housing production, as well as quality of life in a community district. It can move between the community district, the borough, and the city level. It also looks at these variables over time. It has information for every community district in New York City, and the majority of the categories on this tool are broken down by race, which is, as I mentioned before, was a primary concern of the coalition, because we were seeing pretty significant differences in outcomes based on race in New York City. And so it was centrally important that the tool break everything down by race and look at it in through that lens. It's free, it's online, it's updated, it's legally required to be updated every year. And the way that and as Abdul will take us through, it is a lot easier to see some of these different types of data than some of the other tools that are available right now. And then again, it is mapped by community district, so you can zoom in on a more local area. And I already said it's updated every year. So that's one piece. The next piece is the displacement risk index. So this is a little bit more visually oriented. It's a little bit more graphic. The Equitable Development Data Explorer is a map, but you sort of click on the map and then it shares the information alongside of it. The displacement risk index map is a little bit more interactive, and you can better see sort of the relationships between surrounding neighborhoods. What this map shows you is the displacement risk of a neighborhood compared to the rest of the city and other neighborhoods. So communities are listed as highest, higher, intermediate, lower, or lowest displacement risk. And this combines a number of factors. It's broken into 3 groups. The first are factors related to race and income, and what's called population vulnerability. The second category are housing conditions, the current housing conditions. And the third category is how the housing market has changed over time. So all of this is combined in a way that produces a score of higher, highest, intermediate risk for each neighborhood. And one thing I just want to highlight is that this, the way that this is weighted is that it gives more weight and considers more important the indicators around population vulnerability. So around race, income, and English speaking proficiency, and rent burden. This was negotiated between the city and the Racial Impact Study Coalition. There's a lot of thought and back and forth that went into it. And the coalition is, as well as ANHD, is confident that this is an appropriate way to look at this information. And it's important to give more weight to economic and racial factors rather than just looking at the buildings that exist in an area. So this was really a good faith effort by the city, and it's sort of a formula that we, as both the coalition and ANHD, are very comfortable with. So just want to highlight that because there aren't really concerns that information isn't being represented accurately with the way the math was done. And I think when we talk about this more in depth, Abdul will highlight that again as we're talking about the actual data that we see on these maps. So how does having this data address the problem, right? Address the problems that communities were facing? First, information is available all the time to everyone and updated every year. So before, when I said communities got information too late, now everyone gets it at the same time. Everyone has it all the time. Communities don't have to wait for expensive reports to be conducted by the city, by developers. They don't have to wait for these 1,000-page technical documents to come out. They can learn, and we can learn about our communities needs and conditions at any time that we want to investigate them. It is also important that it is in the law that the tool has to be updated regularly, and any changes that are made to sort of how the maps are made or the information that's included has to be publicly announced. So it can't sort of be changed secretly in any way. It's a very transparent and public process. These tools also offer an opportunity for communities to start advocating for their needs without saying that they will accept a rezoning, without accepting hundreds and thousands of new, more expensive apartments into their communities. Instead, we can use this information to start pushing for our needs just because we need things. If our communities haven't received investment over decades, we can just advocate for that investment without waiting to make a trade, without waiting to trade off for more housing, right? It provides better and more information when the land use process starts, and also for just for communities in general. And it creates the possibility for us to start shifting conversations to center race, to center the needs of our communities. Very often, race sort of gets pushed as something that is secondary, or something that is just a coincidence, is the way it's been spoken about a lot, that it's a coincidence that most most market rate or more expensive apartments that have been built over the past few decades, it's a coincidence that they've been built in low income community colors that have good access to trains. This tool gives us the ability to shift some of those conversations, and particularly for directly impacted communities, to have the data that matches their lived experiences, to say, we've been seeing this for decades. We know that this is happening. Now we have a data tool that will show that, will validate those experiences, will strengthen their voices, and will really force the city to reckon with race in decision-making conversations. It's kind of unavoidable now, because even though the Racial Impact Study Coalition fought for and pushed for this legislation, it's the city's tool. So the city has co-signed this tool, and it's an official New York City tool. So everything that's in it is on the official record. So that gives us so much more power in our organizing, in our conversations, and in our advocacy, because we're using the city's own tool to uplift and fight for the things that we know that we need. Great. How is this tool different than other tools? There are a lot of data tools that we can use to look at information. And some tools are created to be much more technical. They're created to be geared towards planners and developers and agencies. And this tool is, although it will be used by all of those folks, it's something that hopefully is more accessible to just regular people. I'm definitely not a data person, but I found it to be more accessible. And it also shows, because it shows information over time, or shows information where you can look at the city, the borough, and the neighborhood level, or you can look at neighborhoods around you. It helps create an understanding of, okay, this is what's happening in my neighborhood. How is that different than other places? And why does that matter? So, like I said, it shows change over time. It has a comparison to the borough and the city, everything just about, except for where it was not possible because the data isn't collected in that way. Everything is broken down by race, and it covers a large group of indicators. Once we start going through it, it covers dozens of indicators. So it really can create not a perfectly complete, but a pretty accurate and filled out portrait of a neighborhood, as opposed to a lot of the tools that we have sort of look at one piece of those things. So look at race and income, or look at foreign-born population, or look at housing. We have all of those things in other tools sort of in different places. And this is everything in one location, which of course makes things easier, and it makes us more able to make comparisons, draw conclusions, and have a better understanding. The displacement risk index is very unique. And it's something that only a few other cities in the country have similar tools, but it shows what communities are at highest and lowest risk of displacement, broken down by demographics, race, income, et cetera, by market pressure, and by housing conditions. And given that this is, as I said before, the city's official tool, this is also an acknowledgement of the city that some areas face displacement risk, which is something that has not been part of the narrative or the conversation over the past couple decades. So first, it acknowledges that displacement risk exists in more in certain areas than others. And also it considers things like race and the foreign-born population in making that decision. So it recognizes that those factors of our lives can make us more at risk for displacement. Communities of color face a higher displacement risk because they are communities of color. And so this is very significant, because anything that's in sort of this displacement risk analysis means that the city is acknowledging a higher risk, which means that the things that we advocate for, the decisions that are made, have to take that into consideration now. So the city, because it's their own tool, they can't ignore the decisions they make in areas that have a high displacement risk, especially when it's because of race or economic vulnerabilities. So the tool both is important because it is an official tool from the city, and also because it just presents information in a very different way than the other tools that we have. So what can we do with these new tools? We can better understand our communities. What are the conditions of our neighborhood? Have they changed over time? How do they compare to other parts of the city, to the city as a whole? We can also use this understanding to advocate for our needs. So what things should we change? What resources are our communities lacking, and what resources do we have? What would make our communities better? How do we advocate for those resources and things that we want to see changed? And then lastly, this tool can also help us better understand land use proposals, which will come up a little bit more when we talk about the racial equity reports. But when there are land use, or even before there are land use proposals, we can use this tool to decide and understand better as communities what should be built in our communities. What do we want to be built? What serves us? And then when there are projects on the table, we can answer more clearly, well, do these projects meet our needs? Is this in line with what we want and what we should have? And will new developments increase the existing displacement risk for our neighbors? Will people be put at risk by some of these proposed developments? Does the housing that's going to be produced help people in our communities stay in their homes? So we can use this new tool to organize, to advocate, and to really fight for the needs of our communities, both in the context of a land use change, but also completely separate of that, and just because our communities need what they need. So to understand how the tool works, we're going to be looking at a real neighborhood. And as we're going through the tool, we're going to be contextualizing that with an actual neighborhood so we can understand what it looks like to use the tool. Our case study is going to be focused on the community district in Queens of Jackson Heights and North Corona. And this is a community that has a little bit less than 200,000 people in the community, in the neighborhood. The community is over 80% non-white, so predominantly Latine, but a largely non-white community. And the median age is 37. This is a community of families. The age demographic is spread all across the board, and there are young children to senior citizens, but it is definitely a community that is largely families, working class families. And over 60% of residents are foreign born. So it is an immigrant community where about half of the population doesn't have English as their first language, or has some limits on their English language proficiency. So this is just sort of the basics of the community. And we've chosen a community that is diverse, that is a working class community, to sort of go through how we can use the tool to start understanding our neighborhoods and answering questions that we have. So I will close us out right here. And this is going to be the end of module 1, which is our introduction. And we will see you all on the other side in module number 2, where we're going to start going through the basics of the tool.